And good morning. You ever get rid of a plane that you absolutely regretted afterwards? Well, this is mine. This is the P-51A, and I have a pilot with no experience in there. It gives you an idea how full my stable is. Um, but I got rid of this plane, moved on to the P-51D, which is a fine aircraft, by the way, too, and always ended up regretting it. Um, and I have a couple of these. I have the XF5U is another one, Flying Pancake, aircraft I dearly love. And I got kind of talked out of it by a friend of mine online, Captain Chaos, who said, that plane is you and you are that plane. And I kept it. And though I don't play it that often, every time I fly it is a sheer joy. And I don't know if it's just the fact that I have such fond memories, and you know how memories are, the reality sometimes doesn't match up to the memory. But this is an aircraft that I remember just loving and always regretted getting rid of it. And I was at 4.5 million silver and nowhere to spend it on. And I thought, why not? Um, Now, in previous videos, I've gone over it, but it's been a very long time, so I will go over this aircraft a little bit. Uh, this aircraft is a result of the British Commission that came over to buy P-40s from the United States. Uh, and they were in the middle of a hot war, and they desperately needed aircraft. And people may talk bad about the P-40, but it was still a 360 mile an hour aircraft that was good to medium altitude, and despite disparagement from some quarters, gave a very good account of itself. It was used extensively in North Africa by both the U.S. and Great Britain during the war. And so they came over to buy them, and they ended up getting quite a few by Lend-Lease anyway. But the Curtiss factory was just chock full of orders. They were fulfilling orders for the U.S., which was engaged in the Pacific War as well, and had a screaming need for them. They had aircraft like the P-39 that, due to some unfortunate development choices, just never performed as well as they wanted it to. Aircraft like the P-38 and P-47 were in development but hadn't quite come out yet. And so when the British went to Curtiss, Curtiss said, "Listen, we're absolutely stock full. We cannot do any more production for you. I'm sorry." And the U.S. War Department said, "Listen, you need to go talk to North American. They're they've got lots of capability, and maybe they can make the aircraft for you, and we'll give you a license for it." So they went and talked to North American Aviation, and they said, "Well, that's a nice aircraft, but it was designed, 5 years ago. Started its design cycle 5 years ago. And while it's a good aircraft, we can do better with the same engine, a much more modern airframe. You'll get much better performance out of it, and we can deliver it to you just as fast as we could tool up." And well, the British were kind of amazed at the statements because, frankly, statements like that rarely turn out to be true in aircraft development. Well, this is one that did. And it's a rare example, and it's a tribute to North American Aviation and its design team. Interestingly enough, one of the designers of the aircraft was a guy that had come over to Germany from Germany after working on the Messerschmitt Bf 109. And you can see some design similarities, and they ended up during the war painting broad white stripes on the down the middle of the aircraft's wings, because from a distance there was not much of a silhouette difference between the two. What made the aircraft so amazing was the laminar flow wings here, and if you look at it, you'll see that the hump of the wing is way back on the wing. Starts way back here. There's the center line and the hump of the wing. And if you know much about aerodynamics, you know that this is what is actually creates the lift, because as the wind flow comes over it, it gets slowed down. Of course, the bottom of the wing is straight, and that creates the lift. Well, a laminar flow wing puts the lift edge, instead of out towards the front, back towards the center. And what that did was delayed turbulence. And delayed turbulence meant the turbulence is coming back here instead of here. What that gave you was a much produce less drag. Okay, and when you start talking about aircraft design, drag is everything. So they did that. It was a very typical design of its in its time for this reason. You know, you can see that the frame comes back up over the back of the seat, which is nice. You can put some additional strengthening of the fuselage from that. You get to this rear pillar, provides more strength for the aircraft. It's got a design advantages, but one of the big ones is your visibility of the rear from here to here is very restricted. It was one of the first things they changed when they uprated the model. Okay, so that being said, let's go on and take a look at the other thing about this aircraft, and you'll notice this design scoop. And what this did was, this is the radiator way back here. And so you draw in air, you heat it, you force it through the radiator, and it's heated, and you get a jet effect. Again, you pick up some speed on that. So what is normally just a drag-inducing thing actually became a thrust-producing thing. And that made a major difference. Now, the American engine of the time was the Allison. And it was designed around turbochargers. And you'll see that in the P-38. And a turbocharger is a nice thing to have. Certainly enjoy it. It's a good aircraft, and it doesn't suffer from parasitic loss. What's parasitic loss? That's when you put a supercharger in the front of the aircraft, and you overdrive the engine. Well, but you lose a certain amount of engine efficiency when you do that. And furthermore, you needed a two-stage intercooled supercharger for that engine. And Allison isn't a dumb company. They started to design it, but it takes a lot of work if the aircraft isn't designed, or the engine isn't designed to take it in the first place. And they never really overcame it. And by the time they did, Packard, which is an extinct auto company, had picked up the production license for the Merlin. So the Army bought these as well when they started delivering these to the British, and they went under the name A-36 Apache. And it was quick. Oh my God, for its time, it was quick. And it could carry some bombs underneath it, could be used for photo reconnaissance, but it didn't have any altitude capability because over 15,000 feet, its performance really started dropping off because of the Allison, and had neither a supercharger nor a turbocharger. You know, the British were looking at that, the Americans were looking at that, and they both came up with the design about the same time. We got these Merlins, and they have two-stage superchargers on them, and the basic layout of the engines isn't that different. Why don't we see about putting these Merlin engines in this aircraft? And oh Lord, did it make a difference. Now, in this game, that's not all that well represented, because when you look at the upgrades here, the P-51 is coming in about 416. That's a bit of a misnomer, but it's not. And you're going to say, okay, explain that one. When they put the Merlin engine into it, you'll see it here. This is a Merlin designation for Packard. And you'll see the difference here. 1710, which is the Allison engine, 1710, which is the Allison engine, and then you have the Merlin engines here. When they put that in, they got a 440 mile an hour fighter. And they took some time, and when they redesigned that engine, they stuffed additional gas tanks in it. Well, the engine didn't take that much gas to begin with, and when you put the extra gas tank in it, and if you've ever seen the layout of a cockpit, if you want to do a little research, you'll actually see a fuel gauge where it says wing center line tank, bulb, mid center line tank. There's like 5 different tanks in this thing. They got a range on it which was just unbelievable for the time. I mean, this thing was going to Berlin and back in the B version. So if you look at the upgrades on this, and you come to the D Mustang, you should start off with a B. There you go. And tells you next to nothing. That was the aircraft that began the battle for Berlin. Still the same type, and when you go over here to the D, that's when you get the bubble canopy. And it actually slowed down a little bit when it got to the D, and that doesn't show up. And when you start looking at this, though, 441, that would be about right. Okay, but from the B on, this was an extremely quick aircraft. And it made a huge difference. Now, that being said, let's go to battle with this. Now, the tank had installing the extra gas tank had a, nothing comes for free in tank design and aircraft design and ship design. And that's very much the case here. Enjoying my coffee and my Coke, by the way, so bear with me a little bit if you hear the occasional gulp. If you ever try to talk for 20, 30 minutes straight, you'll know your voice does get a little dry. And they installed the extra gas tanks. Well, guess what? It couldn't turn with a Spitfire, and it couldn't climb quite as quick as a Spitfire. And so it has some negative effects as well. But where a Spitfire had trouble getting more than a couple of 100 miles away from its base, this thing was flying to Berlin and back. And that solved the American air battle and did a lot to shorten the war. And that kind of leads to another point, which I found very interesting in my research on this, which was a guy named Dunnigan that does How to Make War series. I don't know if the man's still alive. He was old when I was in my 20s and first started reading him. But the only people that ever seemed to doubt the efficiency of the air war on Germany were the people prosecuting it. And the Germans went at some length to say, documenting very thoroughly just what the effect of the air war was on them. A big amount of their anti-aircraft guns that could have been used for anti-aircraft were diverted to fend off bombers that could now be defended. And a large amount of their electronics industry, a large amount of their optics industry, all went to prosecuting the air war on their side. The P-51 presented a lot of challenges. The only aircraft that could really fight with it was the Bf-109, which was quite a bit slower at first, and they could fix some of those problems with upgrades to the aircraft, but they could only fix it to a degree. And that's not that the German engineers were bad. Actually, they were quite excellent. But when you get an aircraft that had been fighting since the Civil War, Spanish Civil War to be exact, you had some issues. You could only take the airframe so far. Now I'm going to take a minute to go out of the, talk about the game here a little bit. Single engine heavy fighters without a rear turret are kind of your meat. And you'll notice that another P-38 wants to scissor with me. Now he'll fly out of the way and this guy will come back. And since I'm not going to fall for that, he'll come back around in just a minute. So we'll keep an eye on our radar. But the reason I say that is because, more than anything else, you have a maneuverability advantage on the fellow. You have a speed advantage on him. And he can't do anything to get away from you. As much as he'd like to. And the game does not copy the P-38's true advantages, which is climb faster than anything else in the U.S. inventory. And it could dive faster than anything else in the U.S. inventory. The P-47 might have come close to it in the diving, but certainly not in the climb. And that's something that really doesn't make it into the game. This is an arcade game, guys. Alright, if you're looking for a flight simulator, yeah, you can find them, but they're not like working against two aircraft at the same time. Luckily, the one aircraft is a, see, I don't have my alts. Yeah, it's a P-38, pretty twisty aircraft. Which goes to show this isn't, P-51 is not an invincible aircraft, but it's a good one. You also have some extreme height abilities, and I would urge you to make it to take advantage of it. And you notice we're topping 6,000 feet. We haven't really shown and now we're just coming up to the top of its range. So when it comes to all the twin-engine heavy fighters, you've pretty much got a very large advantage on the aircraft the minute you get on its tail. Now, the disadvantage is the machine guns, of course. No 20mm cannons. U.S. really didn't get a hold of its cannon problem until the advent of the Colt Mark 12. Okay.
Do you copy? Over.
I still have my flaps on. This is unfortunate. when I want speed, and I want speed. Especially since he shot me down and I'm one vindictive son of a gun.
Way to go. Victory is
We all have our faults, folks, and that's mine.
unable to proceed. Return it
Now that has to be
copy.
a robot because they love to ram. So you have to be aware of that. Maneuver a little earlier against them. They don't care. They just as soon ram you as anything else. And I think they prefer it to guns, to be honest with you. Okay, we finally got that. That took a lot longer than it probably should have.
Enemy is launching rocket strikes on our complex. Try to neutralize the enemy.
Let's see what we can do to get up to altitude and contest for the military base. More pretty 38Fs. You notice how quickly we're closing the range on this guy. Now, it's not a turn and burn fighter. Kind of comes in midway in the maneuverability.
Great job today. We'll be waiting for you back home.
But that is, without a doubt, one of my favorite aircraft in the entire game. And boy, do I enjoy it. It is like greeting an old friend. Now, the pilot is not showing the aircraft off to the best of his ability because he's a new pilot. Alright, we got 7 kills, 4 assists. Did almost 2,000 points, aerial points and damage. Critical damage, 3. Capture points and was destroyed once. But thoroughly enjoyed it. Now, yeah. I love that name. Ah. Okay, I just had to do that. Then we had, this is the guy that I shot down and shot me down. Pew Pew Joe. So, thoroughly enjoyable aircraft. Thoroughly enjoyable. It can also, because of its size advantage, double as a boom and zoom. And the weakness is going to be right here. 208 damage per second. So when this guy gets to his first 2 points, it will go into Marksman 1, and then Marksman 2. Show you the upgrades on this. I did not take the horizontal console surface adjustments because I wanted the improved reflector sights. So when I get Marksman 1 and Marksman 2, that gives you minus 10% to dispersion and 10% to the accuracy, and this gives me another 10% to accuracy. So that's 10 and 20 to dispersion and accuracy respectively, and that will help concentrate that fire. You get much more effective fire that way. That's my go-to configuration these days. Till the game changes with a patch or something, I'll probably have to change it out. Let's talk about the upgrades just a little more. I use the aircraft polish to get a little more speed out of it. Lightweight airframe because it gives you 3% in all axis. And that's about it. Okay. Really good aircraft. Really enjoy having it back. You know, by far not the most successful game I've ever had in it, but not bad. Not bad at all. It can compete with anything in the sky, used correctly, and that's, don't take that with a grain of salt. Take it as an absolute fact. When you're against turn and burns, use your speed, use your altitude, bounce them. Zoom away. When you're against heavy engine fighters, get on their tail as quickly as possible, ride them to doom. They will not be able to get away from you no matter what. We will have to watch the scissoring aircraft. When you talk about ground attack aircraft, S-turn. Hit your flaps key, and I haven't talked about this in forever, so I'm going to. About how I set up the aircraft keys. Here it is, settings. Drop bombs, drop extra rocket, B or space, whichever you prefer. And talk about flight. You extend flaps. And then you have an option here. And if you push this button, hit this radio button, once you press it, it stays on until you release it. Okay, so your flaps are something when you're getting in a turning fight, and especially with something that's more maneuverable than you, sometimes you can get an advantage by hitting your flaps key and slowing down. You can make them over. You're going to lose some speed. You're going to you hit your S key. You can slow down. The guy is on your tail now, is in front of you, and you've got an extremely fast aircraft. Yeah. Okay. And I put it in a different place from the. I use the M key just to get away from the WASD and WSAD keys and the tab keys and the, all the keys that are concentrated on the left-hand side of the keyboard that aren't terribly useful to you. Well, they're all terribly useful to you, but you hit the wrong one at the wrong time, and you may have some problems there. The battle interface, left Alt. When you look at that again, I've got the press the key. It gives you a lot more information as to the range of the aircraft instead of you guessing. A lot of times it will tell you the name of the player or the robot. And it will also tell you the range, which is terribly important. So you know which aircraft to concentrate on first, what's the biggest threat, which one you can get to fastest. And I find that very valuable. All right. So enough about that. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you for flying the very unfriendly skies with Tironan, and we'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.